Hey, good morning and welcome back to my art studio, and welcome back to the third class in a row now of our online lessons. So last week I'd just like to say how fantastic the work was. I was really amazed by those beautiful shoes that you'd all been posting online. So here's a quick look at some of them. I was really pleased with how everybody picked up on using the paints and everything as well. Thanks for coming to the lesson last week and watching me get on with the painting and getting to know each other a little bit more. Some of you art students that go to my classes at Rawns, Denford and Irthingborough haven't met before, so that's been absolutely lovely to do that. Now today what we're doing is we're doing something again which everybody has, that we all carry around with us each day, and that is our keys. So I've done a drawing for everyone today to watch. The important things to look for when drawing your keys are a few things. Here's my keys here. I just put them inside this little pot like this. And the reason I did that is because then you've got something to kind of look in between those different shapes with. So on here we've got this circular object. You might want to use a square box. Sometimes people struggle with ellipses and circles, or you might want to have a crack at doing something a bit rounder like this. But what I was talking about just a second ago is that you can look inside of all the negative spaces in between the keys in order to help you space them out correctly and get them in the right place. The other thing you also need to be aware of is something called foreshortening. So it's a bit like perspective in a sense, where objects are going away from us slightly, so or they're at a different angle. So you need to be aware of how the shapes and sizes of things change as they either go away from us and get smaller, or things are tilted at different angles. So you'll see on my drawing how I map out all the different shapes, and as I'm doing that I'm looking at the negative shapes. That's the shapes in between objects and in the background of objects, which is why a box is really good for doing that. As I'm going around, I'm measuring things off against each other in order to get them in the right place. So then you end up with the keys hopefully looking the shape and size that they should be. You can use the comparative technique a little bit, and you'll see me doing that right at the beginning of the drawing. But you know, just see how you get on. It's important to remember that as you go through the process of drawing your keys, that you can and will make some mistakes. And it's important to recognise those and just to make those corrections and be brave enough just to rub out an area and put it back in until you get it right. Sometimes it might look just the same as it did before, but slightly different and therefore better as well. And another tip is to stand back from your work from a little bit further away, just to check how things are looking. As I'm drawing, when I was drawing just now, I was right close up and doing all the details and things, but then I stood back to see if the shapes were in the right place. And then I also did that when I was trying to get reflections in the metallic objects. When you're doing metallic objects, the important thing to remember about that is that having a little bit of contrast within the dark shadows and the highlights on the picture will help that object to stand out. So reflections and highlights are about getting the contrast between the dark and the light areas within your key. So here, look, you can see how it's really dark and really light in some areas. It's a bit blurry actually, but you'll get the idea when you have a look at this. Okay, so let's have a go then and see how we get on with drawing keys. The thing I'll be doing on Wednesday is I'm going to actually paint one of the keys as well, and perhaps show you one or two other things you can try out using a bit of collage as well. Okay, so let's get on and do it. Have a look at the drawing. I will have speeded it up like I did before, so you can see how it works. Otherwise, I think this drawing took me over an hour to do, so I don't want you to sit there and watch that for a whole hour, but I want you to see how the process sort of works as the drawing takes place. Okay, so let's have a go. Right, so here we are then. First of all, this is something that is great practice for drawing. It's drawing the ellipses of the little pot that you can see at the top there. So I do it quite loosely and freely to begin with, and then gradually just make little corrections as I go around it. You can see it's almost becoming quite a dark, heavy outline, but all that will soon disappear as I continue drawing. Yeah, and there you can see me just making a few measurements. I'm also looking at the angle of the first key on the left, just there as well. And you can see both those kinds of lines are starting to appear. Now, what I mentioned earlier about looking at the negative shapes, as I'm drawing these keys in, I'm also comparing the edge of the pot or the lid against the keys themselves. So I'm looking at the negative spaces. That's the spaces in between the key and the shape of the pot. And the key ring itself, the actual ring that holds all the keys together, I put that little loop up there, and what I did is I looked to see where that ring came up against the top of the lid, or the edge of the lid, just there. And then I started to draw the little electricity box thing key in as well. So again, I was looking at all the different angles. Using my pencil, I often use my pencils to measure those things out too. So by that I mean hold up my pencil against the angle of the key and then compare that to my drawing. So you can see I've got all the basic shapes there now, and I was quite happy with most of that. You might see me rub out a few more bits as we go through the drawing, but it's starting to take shape now as well. You'll see in a few minutes that I use a piece of paper under my hand as well, because there you go. Because what I found was, of course, that because I'm left-handed and I've drawn most of the picture out already, I was smudging the ground quite a lot. And it's just a little bit annoying as you're working. It kind of puts a grey sheen over the surface of the image. So here you can see that I'm colouring in or shading in the background at the moment. That's because that side of the pot is particularly dark. So I'm already looking at those negative spaces in the background of the keys to help me to work out if I've got the shapes right. So, you know, I could adjust the keys if I needed to as I went along as well. And here I'm already launching into the black key as well, and looking at the fact that the black key itself had some reflective quality to it, which I was looking very closely at as I was drawing that section. So on we go. And there are a few highlights and shadows along the shaft there of the key as well. And as I said earlier, it's important to keep standing back from wherever you're working occasionally and just looking back at it. You'll see me move the paper out of the way occasionally just to have a look and see how it looks against the rest of the picture as well. There we go, we can see the key already taking shape against the edge of the pot there. And
and it's nice just to have a look and see how things poke out from the side of the lid or the pot at the same time. Now I just kind of moved around to the next part next to the key because I'm kind of interested in that shadow underneath and the reflective quality on the end of that key there. So on the end of that key there, it was a lot lighter because, as you've probably realised, the light is coming in from the right hand side here. So that triangular bit that you can see there was actually a lot lighter. But I do darken it down a little bit later. Now you notice I'm sort of hopping around a little bit again. I mean, it is just to do with the way that I work, but I'm also looking at individual shapes rather than concentrating on one particular key at one time. I mean, it does look like I'm just doing the black one, but I am looking at the shapes around the black key at the same time. And in between, you saw I did that bit just below the nearest hole on that key. There's a little bit of an old broken key coming through there as well. That was my garage key. It snapped off one day. So this is the bit that I find quite interesting. Well, or these bits are the bits that I found quite interesting about this picture. Can I make these keys look reflective? How do I do that? Well, the important thing is that when you're doing the metallic objects, there's lots of sharp contrasting highlights and shadows that are often quite close to each other and quite detailed. This bit that I'm doing just under here was actually quite matte, but other areas like the bronze looking key or the copper looking key is much more has got much more detail and contrasting shadows and highlights on, which helps it to look reflective, which is what we're after. So just moving across a little bit more. That particular area of the key, the oval was a little bit tricky to get going at first, but I do correct it a little bit as I go along, particularly slightly later on. And what I'm doing right here now is I wrote in Miller, which is the name of the key there, but the important thing here is I'm not just trying to write out the words, I'm trying to look just at where the highlights and shadows are on that actual surface, so it's more of a bump or a texture as opposed to an actual piece of writing. So try not to see it as writing just, but also see it as it's highlights and shadows again, just like the rest of the key. So it's starting to come through a little bit more now. It's a lot lighter on that side. You see, look, I just rubbed out a whole area there so that I could run back in and put in some more of that detail that was important in that particular area, and just make it a little bit more refined. So looking at the negative spaces there and working my way around the pot. Yeah, that bit there, what I just did, that was with a putty rubber, just to add a few more highlights. Lighten up that area of the key and bring it forward, basically is what I did. So I'm just running along the long bit of the key, the shaft if you like. So when you're doing this bit, you could, if you wanted to, use a ruler to ensure the keys are nice and straight. I was trying to think of the fact that the key might get, because it was coming towards me, it might get a little tiny bit smaller as it goes away, as kind of a little bit of foreshortening was going on, like in the black key. So by foreshortening, we mean that if you laid the key flat in front of you, it would look like it's proper and full length, but if you had the key at an angle or tilted towards you, it might look a bit shorter, or it would be, the measurements would be shorter when you draw it out. So I was thinking about that for this particular key that I'm working on at the moment. Yeah, so you could use a ruler to straighten that whole key out. I just corrected it a few times to make sure it looked reasonably straight. Yeah, they can get a bit wobbly if you're not careful when you've got different parts of a key. So if you look up there at the bronze one, you can see there's a little bump, and then you've got the actual shape that opens the mechanism of the lock. So you've got to make sure that that is straight, even though they are different sections. You can see just there, I'm just making alterations to it now, just to sort of try to make it look a bit straighter, or be a bit straighter I should say. So in a second we'll be zooming in a little bit closer. There we go. So again, we've got a little bit of lettering. Try not to see the lettering as lettering, more as shapes and highlights that make up something that looks like lettering. Obviously it is lettering, but you can just be a bit more subtle and suggestive without having to outline and draw in those letters really clearly. You can just suggest it. You don't need to read it necessarily. I mean, if it's important to you, then obviously you can do that. So at this point I'm just working a little bit further down, but then I come back up again, and I've just ripped up a piece of putty rubber so I can work back in some highlights that I missed earlier. There we go. And then there's some more highlights and shadows and details I'm putting in there as well. And there at the moment you can see I'm just working out how the key would actually fall behind the others by drawing a nice straight line through. You can see how the line cuts through the keys on top a little bit. It's just to help me get the accuracy and the angles. And then in a bit I'll be going back over those two keys as well, which I'm doing now. So in a few seconds we'll zoom back out again so we can see a little bit more of the detail, or a bit more of the shape of the whole picture. So there was all sorts of curved shadows, particularly on that bit where the key's laying over the top of the other one. Here we go. So nice, crisp, contrasting highlights and shadows and details on the keys to show the metallic quality of it, the reflective quality of it. At that point there, where I just moved that bit of paper, I'll put a piece of paper just underneath the pot or the lid that the keys are in, so I can see the shadows on the floor. So it's good to have a white background to work back over when you draw your keys, and you can see the shadows underneath the pot and make it look like it's sitting on the surface as well. Here we go. So here I have again tried just to make this key look like it's foreshortened slightly because it is coming towards me. So the front bit being slightly bigger and the shaft as it goes back getting thinner and smaller. There we go. Now this area is a bit darker on this side, but as we go around the outside of the pot, the lid, the light is hitting it a little bit more as you go around, so I'm going to get a bit lighter as I go around there. I'm just adjusting the shape of the ellipses slightly as well, and these nice shadows here help the keys just to look like they're hanging over the edge of the lid as well. That's coming on. And the other little thing that's going to really help these keys to look like they're inside of something is there are quite a few other shadows and things at the bottom of the pot which was white because it was a coffee jar lid. Here we go. So often when I'm shading I like to go back over them almost like cross hatching. If you go in different directions you can stop the cross hatching looking like it's moving around everywhere, or the hatching, There I was just using soft sort of marks. That's the shadows I was just talking about inside the pot. It's gone off screen a bit now. There we go. So working on getting the rest of these bits in. There's a nice lip around the front of the pot on that side. So I'll put that in. I think I'll thin it out a little bit more later. But there's those shadows that we're talking about. So I've not overdone it because I just want there to be contrast between the keys themselves and the bottom of the pot. There's me using a piece of paper just to prevent me from smudging it. And here I've literally got the pencil on its side so I can create softer marks relatively quickly and smoothly around there, and I'll work back into it as I come around there. There we go. And again, with this shading, don't just go in one direction, you can go in a few different directions, and that helps you to flatten out the shading rather than making it like it's sweeping and moving around a lot. There we go. Loads of fun. So next lesson, what I'll be doing is, or when we have our lesson, what I'll be doing is probably painting some of these keys to make them look metallic with acrylic paints, which is something you could try too. And there's the drawing, and there's the keys, and there's the final picture. I hope you enjoyed watching that. If you've got any questions, please post them on our website.